Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little late putting this out. I intended to do it during the middle of the week, but it's been a crazy week for me. But nonetheless, easy for me to say, it's time for me to give you an updated 2020 NFL mock draft, a two-round edition. Isn't that exciting? 2 rounds, because since my Bears don't have a first-round pick, I might as well cover some potential thoughts on what they could do in the second round. It's exciting, isn't it? Isn't it? Not really. Okay. I know a lot of you probably don't even really care. So, since we're doing 2 rounds, and I did it in part to be able to cover what the Bears could do in round number 2, let me start off by talking about them and just talking about some of the usual stuff that I do. When you look at this Bears team and you look ahead at the offseason to come, regardless of how the season ultimately does or does not play out this year, this is a team that we know has a few challenges. One is the quarterback position, most obviously. Do they still believe in Trubisky? Do they still want to give him another year or 2 at the helm as the guy while he's still under that rookie contract? I don't know. Like, it most certainly is possible they may look to try and bring in a different veteran quarterback to back him up. But if you're expecting at this point this organization to make a big move for a young quarterback, I would probably tell you you're waiting with bated breath, because it's not going to happen. So if you move from that possibility and you look at this organization more in a sense of reality, you have some big needs that kind of really stand out to me. Number 1 is tight end. I'm not saying that's the number 1. Let me rephrase that. One of the big ones is tight end. But the reality is Trey Burton's contract probably prevents him from being cut next year, because there's no real benefit to cutting him from a salary cap standpoint. So you're going to have him back in 2020. You would assume former second-round pick Adam Shaheen is probably going to be shown the door, because in 3 years, son, you ain't done shit. So it is time to move the hell on. But when you look at this tight end class, I don't know that it's particularly good, and I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense for the Bears to have to address it here in round number 2. Not saying they couldn't, not saying they shouldn't, just saying I don't know how likely it is. I think another need that you could look at for this team is on the offensive line, and I would say particularly on the interior of the line. They need a badass in the middle. They need somebody that could be a road grader as a run blocker. They need some type of improvement there. And that is a place, offensive guard, particularly right guard, that you could be looking at this team investing one of their 2 second-round picks in, assuming they don't make deals or they don't do anything like that. And it would certainly make a lot of sense, and I've got them taking Creed Humphrey from Oklahoma at pick number 50 with their second-round pick. When you look at the defensive side of the ball, I could argue that Prince Amukamara, might be at the end of his usefulness outside at corner for the Bears, and I don't know if they really have an adequate starter in the wings waiting. You've got Kyle Fuller on one side, but even if you believe in Duke Shelley, it's him and Screen, and they're both better served as slot corners at this stage. So there is definitely a possibility that when the Bears get into this draft, I think it is important, as much as you might identify certain needs or have a belief in certain needs, you have to look at this from more of a holistic standpoint and say, there's a possibility that they could draft somebody that doesn't necessarily fill an immediate need, but it makes the most sense in the long term, such as somebody like a Trayvon Diggs from Alabama. It doesn't have to be that. Personally, I would love to see this team actually invest a high pick in an edge rusher. Like, if I had my guesses right now, in terms of what those 2 second-round picks would be for the Bears, assuming there weren't trades or maneuvering or anything else, it's very possible that those 2 picks are probably going to be spent on an edge rusher and some type of offensive lineman. And in both cases, that makes a world of sense, because they are 2 positions that they have needs for, 2 positions that you can spend a second-round pick on, and if you hit it right, the guys can come in and start, at least contribute early right away. But from a Bears standpoint, you can make an argument for a lot of positions. And one thing I would like to emphasize for this Bears team too is one thing I know that they truly lack on that offense is game-changing speed. Like, if you were trying to run a Chiefs type of Andy Reid type of offense. It's already bad enough. You don't have Andy Reid as a play caller. You have Matt Nagy. It's already bad enough. You don't have Patrick Mahomes because you're passed on him to take Mitchell Trubisky. But it's also really bad when you don't have the Travis Kelce and the Tyreek Hill to be able to run that system. As much as Allen Robinson is great and deserves to go to the Pro Bowl this year, as much as I still believe in wide receiver one, Anthony Miller, and as much as I like some of the potential of Javon Wims and even Riley Ridley, the one thing that this team needs is a difference-making, game-changing, explosive downfield threat in that passing game. And maybe that comes out of this draft as well. It probably needs to, honestly. When you look at the rest of the mock draft, getting past my Bears bias for a moment here, probably put some of you to sleep. Not a lot changed with the first few picks. Burrow going number 1 to Cincinnati. If they get the number 1 pick, like that seems obvious. Chase Young going number 2 to the Giants, again, feels pretty obvious. Andrew Thomas, number 3 to Georgia, from Georgia, going to the Redskins. You know, the Redskins looking at the Trent Williams saga and wanting to protect Haskins long term. Again, that's a deal that could make a lot of sense. Although Jeudy could make some sense as well. Jeudy going number 4 to Miami could make a lot of sense. I'm sorry, I just don't know yet if I'm bought in and believed in Tua Tagovailoa going 4th overall in the draft. That feels like an incredibly unnecessary reach and gamble here. Absolutely unnecessary gamble and reach. When you look at some of the other players, like early favorite of mine, even going back to last year, is CeeDee Lamb. Like, I know Jeudy plays at Alabama and he gets a ton of attention, but to me, CeeDee Lamb is a stud in the making. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going in the top 10. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see several wide receivers going round number 1, because this class is really good. And with this class being really good, there are also going to be those teams that feel like there are different levels of good. Like there's elite talents, second-level talents, third-level talents. So teams might not want to risk missing out on a true difference-maker impact guy, and that could push some of these wide receivers up the board, especially when you lay out the board and you evaluate their level of talent compared to other positions. I've got Herbert going 12 to the Panthers. You know, we're finding out that Kyle Allen's not that guy. And, you know, I'll say this, is that you've already fired Ron Rivera. It makes no sense to keep Cam Newton. It really doesn't. And Panthers fans have got to come to grips with that reality. It is time to move on. 'Tis better to do it a year early than a year too late. It absolutely is. I've still got Tua going 22 to the Miami Dolphins. Now, look, if Tua started falling a little bit, they could potentially wait it out. You know, if he was even there, and he might not be. And they might just end up taking him at number 4 any damn ways. It could be some other quarterback that we're not even talking about right now. It could be. But for the Dolphins, at some point in time, with one of these 3 first-round picks, somehow, some way, one of them's got to equate to a young quarterback, a young difference maker. But when you look at the Dolphins and you look at the fact that they have 3 first-round picks, in theory, that sounds great. And for the draft nerds and everything else, that's great. That's wonderful. You got all this additional draft pick capital. But when you really look at it right now, the 4th overall pick is their own. And they were trying to tank to get the number 1 overall pick. So they failed in that mission. You look at picks 22 and 23. Those come from the trades of Laramie Tunsil and Minkah Fitzpatrick, respectively. Laramie Tunsil was, I believe, the 13th overall pick in that 2016 draft. Minkah Fitzpatrick was the 11th overall pick in the 2018 draft. So, yes, while I understand that they've got another first-round pick in 2021 from the Houston Texans, the reality is they took a 13th overall pick, who's at least played up to that level, and an 11th overall pick, who certainly has played up to that level, and those picks have become picks in the 20s. That's not productive. That's not good. It really isn't. Like, at the time, even my reaction to it is like, you know, and I still say from a Steelers standpoint, yes, Minkah's a really good player, and he's playing like a stud for them, and that is great, and that is wonderful. But still, you have the answer of what you're going to do long-term at the quarterback position. Because even if you think Big Ben's coming back for 2020, which he probably is, how much longer are you going to have him? And then what do? Well, what you do know is that you don't have the long-term answer on your roster currently, because Rudolph sucks, and Ducky Hodges, give me a break. So sometimes I think that's an important lesson for all of us is, you know, we were required to have an instant opinion on deals like this. And that makes sense. We're in a reactionary world. You got to have a reaction to it. But I also think it's important for us to not automatically assume that our real-time reaction is automatically correct. That said, it also can't just be said that the Steelers were massive winners in the Fitzpatrick deal because of some of the things that I brought up. But it also can't be said at this point that the Dolphins are winners in the Fitzpatrick deal because they took an 11th overall pick and potentially turned him into a pick in the 20s. A year after drafting him, that's not good. That's not good for anybody. And sometimes that's where the full and complete context is needed. It's like the draft people you see on Twitter that are bumping themselves and thumping their chest about DK Metcalf and everything else, and totally ignoring the fact that he had questionable hands, he had a string of injuries. There were reasons that the guy went in the second round. Yes, he had great size, and yes, he had great straight-ahead speed. But there were concerns, and there were concerns that they're forgetting about as to why he went there. But what's fascinating to me is as much as you've seen so many people beating their chest about him, why aren't the same number of people beating their chest about an A.J. Brown who had absolutely no business going where the hell he did in the draft? You get what I'm saying? Like, sometimes that context is needed. Context is important, and it's amazing how people will pick and choose kind of their narratives and what they focus on. But nonetheless, I'm going to put my picks in the description box, so feel free to check them out and rant at me about them. But for now, that's it. I am out of here. Later.